Chapter 32. Finding a dress that would accommodate her tails limited her options significantly. The spaghetti strap tank dress she wanted simply wasn't a viable option. Due to the positioning of her tails, all of the slinky dresses made for Terran body types were out of the question. The conspicuous bulge created by the positioning of her black tail was highly problematic. Dresses made for counter-hominid weren't viable either. Most had either no breasts or too many. She eventually gave up on the goal of buying a one-piece dress. Her body type was too unconventional for buying something off the rack. If she was willing to coil her brown tails around her legs, she'd have a lot more choices, but looking like a furry-legged Terran would be problematic considering her objective for the evening. Selecting a flattering top was easy enough. Without raising her waistline to just under her breasts, there was no to deal with the positioning of her black tail. This wasn't an issue when dealing with people who knew what that bulge behind her was, but that wasn't going to be the case tonight. With the help and guidance of Syntholo and a pair of saleswomen, Callie purchased a knee-length sarong wrap. It was intended to be tied around the waist. That way she could position the knot where her black tail connected to her spine. Worst case scenario, it would look like she was inexperienced at tying knots, which was fine with her. After tying the sarong around the base of her black tail, she wrapped it around her waist just under the fabric. Before heading to the club, Syntholo rolled and bound her brown tails next to her hips like he'd done on the ship. Kivaz's consciousness sank into the depths of her mind after Callie sent a message to her friends to let them know she was on her way to the club. It didn't take long to get there. She'd never been to Club 9th, although her aunt Bookworm had mentioned it on at least one occasion. She'd seen the rooftop from her mountainside perch, although she hadn't known what it was. It was a 3-story building that was older than most in the area. It had been spared during the Siege of Hyrule, but being a mere 2 blocks from Blade's Edge, that wasn't too surprising. There had only been 2 or 3 impacts within that part of town. From the front of the building, it looked like it may once have been a theater, or perhaps a small opera house. The doors and dual stairways leading into the building were a clear indicator the structure had been constructed to accommodate species classified as size 2 comfortably. Kayla regretted not bringing the twins, just long enough to realize just how warm it was likely to be inside on a crowded night, or how much mischief they'd likely cause. "Are you nervous?" Syntholo asked as he glanced down. Kayla blushed, not realizing she'd reached out her hand to him as they started to approach. "That may be unwise considering why you're here," Syntholo grinned. "A little," she admitted as she withdrew her hand. "I'll send Kiryu a message to let her know I'm here. Nelfrey said she's on the way. I think it will be better if we meet her at the door." They walked up the stairs and waited on the landing between the first floor and the sidewalk. While they waited, a slow stream of patrons filtered in and out of the club. While some were sub-Terrans, the majority of clubgoers fell into the various counter-hominid classifications, mostly bestial races, some reptilians, a few avian species, an occasional amphibious Shega, and even a handful of insectal customers. Each time the door opened, the sound of music flooded out of the building, only to be silenced as the doors closed. Syntholo was watching her. What's with that look?" Kayla asked nervously. "Wait for it," Syntholo grinned. As the door opened, her hips started moving instinctively with the sound of the music. "Just can't help yourself, can you?" Syntholo teased. "How long have I been doing that?" Kayla asked with a start. Her hips stopped moving once the doors closed. "How long have we been standing here?" Syntholo teased. Syntholo's head turned abruptly in response to the sound of a car door closing. A smile crept across his face. "I don't suppose." Nelfrey waved from the bottom of the stairs. She was carrying a box under one arm. She was wearing a white top which tied behind her neck and a split-leg skirt. She was wearing a sapphire necklace, and a matching piece of jewelry on each hip. She had white and gold markings on her upper thighs, shoulders and tail, which was a sharp contrast to her dark gray fur. Slender gold bands circled one wrist and the opposing forearm. She looked tall, slender, and elegant. What she lacked in grace she made up for with an air of confidence and class. "Breathe," Callie whispered as she elbowed Syntholo. "Lady," Nelfrey said, then corrected herself as she rushed up the stairs. "Callie. Thank you for inviting me. I didn't know what to wear. I do hope this is adequate." Callie motioned to her shoulder. "Your fur is not dry yet," she said with embarrassment as she displayed her fingers, which also had fur dye on them. "I was in a rush." "Heat or air dry?" Callie asked. "Air dry," Nelfrey said with confusion. "Hold still, I can help with that," Callie said with a grin as she reached out to the elemental forces and moved a gentle breeze around her as she drew the excess moisture out of the dye. "Who's your Terran friend?" Nelfrey asked. "Is he the pilot?" "I'm not Terran, I'm Laika," he said as he finally loosened his own tongue. "I've been a scout for the Kailani Dominion for a few decades now. I've been serving on her ship for about a week now." "So much for Laika being secretive about their nature," Kayla jeered. "My name must not be spoken aloud," he grinned as he lowered his head while maintaining eye contact. Nelfrey's shoulders raised slightly and her ears lowered backward. Despite the darkness of her fur, Kayla was nearly sure she'd seen her blushing. "It's so nice to meet you, Sir Scout. May I inquire as to your appearance behind your mask?" "Perhaps later," Syntholo said softly as he held out a hand toward her. "Feel free to ask again later, once the evening has matured." Kayla smirked. Nelfrey reached out and rested her fingers limply over his hand. "I swear if he kisses her hand," Kayla thought to her other self. Syntholo kissed the back of her hand with a quirky smile, and then they both burst out laughing. "Vajaritu Ratani," Nelfrey squealed in delight. "I always wanted to do." Act 3, Scene 1, Syntholo laughed. "I saw a live performance at the Nyartha Amphitheater a few years back." "I like your friend," Nelfrey said joyfully. "I'm so glad you asked him to come along." Kayla glanced toward the door as they carried on about what was apparently a famous Erun play, and was relieved to see Kiryu bounding through the door, and rushing down the stairs. "Here comes trouble," Kayla smiled. "You better believe it," Kiryu said with a crooked grin as she rushed past Kayla. Syntholo took a step back as the women leaned forward so their left cheeks touched for a moment, then stepped back and looked each other up and down, mostly up for Kiryu, and mostly down for Nelfrey. Kiryu was wearing a crop top, a pair of shorts that were belted on low on her hips, and high-heeled shoes. She had slim light blue markings on each side of her nose which closely matched the color of her eyes, and a third marking on her forehead. Apparently fur dye was in style among the caninoid species. Kiryu's only natural marking was a black spot which was mostly hidden under her pants. Kayla couldn't help but smile at them. Kiryu was short, muscular, and stocky, standing just over 5 feet tall with heels, whereas Nelfrey was tall, slender, and curvy, standing just under 6 feet tall. "Is that it?" Kiryu asked, motioning to the box. Nelfrey nodded enthusiastically and thrust the box into Kiryu's hands. "The shopkeeper was impressed when I gave him the measurements." "What's going on?" Callie asked nervously. "It was her idea," Nelfrey said defensively. "We decided to make this our first official bitches' night out," Kiryu said as she lifted the lid and took a peek inside the box, paused and looked at Syntholo. "He's her pilot," Nelfrey said swiftly before Kiryu had an opportunity to speak. "I'm Syntholo." "Nice to meet you," he said as he offered to shake her hand. "Oh well," Kiryu giggled. "I hope you don't feel too out of place tonight. March your little ass over here, Callie. You're not fully dressed until you put this on." "Put what on?" Kayla said as she strode over to see for herself. It contained a fox mask with black fabric attached to the back. It was more front-facing than conventional Shamfarian fox spirit masks. It was sized so she could see through the eyes of the mask without obstructing her view. There was no bottom jaw, but it would make the top of her head look similar to a member of the vulpine caiman subspecies from a distance, even if the smoothness would prevent it from actually fooling anyone. It was flat black in color with gold accents around the jawline, eyes, ears, and decorative patterns on the snout and forehead. Kayla blushed brightly and bit her upper lip. Kiryu and Nelfrey looked excited, but she was a little unsure until she saw the crooked smile on Syntholo's face. He seemed pretty smugly confident she wouldn't wear it. What do you think? Kayla thought to her other self. Wearing a sweater to ninth, Kivaza mused. Going incognito isn't a bad idea, and you're the one that said you want to try something different. Kiryu sashayed next to Kayla and rested her hand on her lower back. What do you think, Callie? 3 hot bitches are better than 2. It'll be like we're all sisters for the night, Nelfrey said enthusiastically. I'm just not sure, Kayla said while studying the mask. It seemed like Nelfrey had already been pulled into Kiryu's little scheme. It was a simple enough ploy and rather transparent. More girls at the table meant more attention. Nelfrey was the lure, Callie was a decoy, and Kiryu was rearing to go. It would likely backfire, but it would be interesting to see how things played out. Then again, Kayla just wanted to get laid, and had no idea how this would affect her chances of finding someone capable of lubricating her thighs sufficiently to open her up to new possibilities. Leaving the mask at the table while she was on the dance floor was always an option. One of us, Nelfrey and Kiryu chanted quietly. I'll do it, Kayla said as she seized the mask and put it on the top of her head. Nelfrey rushed over to help her secure it in place. Kiryu started dancing up the stairs while singing. Take a romp on the feral side, and the colored pups yowl a woof a woof. What have I gotten myself into? Callie smiled while trying to sound frustrated. She seems spirited, Syntholo chuckled as the 3 of them made their way up the stairs, following after Kiryu. On the upper landing, the simple gray slabs of the stairwell formed a half-circular ring several yards from the broad entry to the building. The stonework within the semicircle was composed of small, reflective, hexagonal tiles, set into a shimmering black stone. The closer Kayla came to the upper landing, the stranger she felt. The tips of her brown tails tingled, her black tail felt warm, her head felt fuzzy, her thoughts disjointed, her vision blurred and refocused. She could feel her pulse coursing through the ring-shaped stripe on the top of her head, which was concealed beneath her hair. She felt warm, nauseated, and weak. Syntholo and Nelfrey caught her before she could fall. Kiryu rushed over to check on her a moment later. Kayla inhaled deeply and exhaled raggedly. She knew they were speaking, but nothing made sense. She wasn't even positive they were speaking a language she was familiar with. Syntholo knelt in front of her, while the girls steadied her. He put one hand under her chin and held her head up, looking her in the eyes. He was saying something. Kayla watched his lips as he continued to repeat the same 2 words over and over. She could feel Kivaza's consciousness rising up within her, merging into her own. Her eyes refocused. She couldn't see the faint aura of the knacks of Nelfrey or Syntholo. There was a distortion emanating from the ring of stones, like heat rising off the bricks. Her ability to feel the elemental forces felt like it was dwindling. She could sense the knacks of a few patrons as they walked up the stairs behind her, but they seemed to wink out as they passed by. Kayla concentrated on the shape of her mouth movements as she whispered, "Suppression field." Syntholo nodded enthusiastically. Her body lurched forward, passing through the invisible barrier. Her eyes refocused as Kivaza returned to the depths of her mind. The feeling passed swiftly. "You're sure she's not sick?" Nelfrey asked. "I've never seen anyone react so strongly to that," Kiryu said apologetically. "If I had any idea." "A little warning would have been nice," Syntholo growled as he helped Kayla up. "Are you feeling better now?" I think so, Kayla blushed. My tails still feel a little funny. Funny how? Nelfrey sounded worried. The tingling at the tips stopped. They just feel numb now, Kayla said as she patted her brown tails. She was unwilling to tell them anything about how her other tail felt at the moment. The nerve bundle leading to where her stinger rested felt like a live wire, and that certainly wasn't a complaint. She'd be really careful if she ended up slow dancing with anyone. Despite the increased sensitivity, the sensation was both arousing and soothing. It's like an incredibly strong psionic dampening field, but it affects everything. It's going to take a few minutes to get used to, but wow, it's quiet. I know, Nelfrey said, as Syntholo chuckled and Kiryu looked confused. Let's go, Kiryu yipped merrily as she led them to the security booth by the front door. The guard cleared his throat several times, attempting to curb Kiryu's excitement as she kept talking over him. There was a cover charge, which varied based on the level of club access which was being paid for. It was 20 credits just for the main floor, which included the dance floor and bar. The second tier of payment, 30 credits, included the overlook, a railed area on the second floor, which gave a good view of the dance floor. This floor had wait staff who would bring drinks or snacks to the tables. The third level of club access, 100 credits, included 4 balconies which looked over the lower levels and had small kitchens, a lounge area, and elevator access to the floors below. The cost jumped substantially for the level 4 cover charge. At 500 credits, you would have access to a VIP suite which, in addition to the perks available at the previous tiers, also granted camera access through displays built into the tables, allowing the customers to pan and zoom viewing anywhere on the Overwatch floor or below. Is the watchtower available? Kiryu asked as she leaned through the window of the booth. Her tail wagged so vigorously that her behind swayed in tandem. The blur of her long, white fur slapped her hips to the rhythm of her enthusiasm. It's already been reserved, the guard said unsympathetically. Just my luck, she pouted. The one time I come with someone that can afford it. Exactly how much did you get paid for driving me around the other day? Kayla scoffed. Nothing compared to the commission for selling that coat, Kiryu giggled, but hey, I'm cheap, and you're loaded. Syntholo snorted quietly, while trying not to laugh. I should probably. Just, Nelfrey said while looking toward the street. Make sure she doesn't go anywhere, Kayla whispered as she walked past Syntholo and walked over to the security booth. Is the VIP booth charged per person or for the room? Per person, the guard said while looking her up and down. 3 for a VIP room, Kayla said while motioning to herself, Syntholo and Nelfrey. Seriously, Kiryu objected, you'll cover them, not me? That's too much, I really shouldn't, Nelfrey said softly. Yes, ma'am, the guard said with a bored expression as he pushed forward a credit scanner. Syntholo took hold of Nelfrey's arm and whispered something to her. Oh, can I open a tab for the room so we don't have to stop having fun to worry about the cost? Kayla said while grinning at Kiryu. For the 3 of us. Wait, you're serious? Kiryu gaped. I try not to be, Kayla laughed. I was the one that dragged you all out on short notice, so it's my treat. Kiryu grinned. Now you're talking my language. Oh, and ask about the upcharge for the private playroom with restroom. The what? Kayla said. Never mind. How much? That will be an extra 50 credits per person and includes a guest pass restricted to 1 guest at a time per room. That will be 2200 CR. How much would you like to set for your room tab? The guard said without inflection. Can I just put a gal cred on the room, and have whatever is left credited back to my account? Callie smiled. It's your money, the guard said flatly, as he entered everything into the bill. Callie watched his facial expression as she held her wrist to the scanner. Your group will be assigned to VIP room 15, lady. The guard looked at the payment screen and blinked twice. He handed her a brochure explaining the club rules, restrictions, offerings, and exclusions, and asked her to hold out her hand, palm up, so he could administer her access stamp. He held a white device with a rounded bottom against her palm. She felt pressure, then it beeped. Kayla looked at her hand in confusion as she stepped to the side as Syntholo and Nelfrey stepped up to the window. "It's invisible in normal lighting," Kiryu explained. "Once we get inside, you'll be able to see it. It lasts 6 to 8 hours, I think." 4 to 10, varying by species, the guard corrected her while stamping Syntholo's palm. "Once you're inside, make sure to stop at the weapon check-in window on the right." "I will make sure we do," Syntholo said calmly as he rested his wrist on the pommel of his sword. "Upgrade time," Kiryu said as she held out her hand. The guard turned on a small lamp to make sure the new stamp lined up with the one she'd gotten earlier. Kayla told the others to go on ahead while she questioned the guard about the lighting and ink. Temporary or not, she was confident Kivaza would have loads of fun drawing striped patterns on Cyanide's body. It seemed like the least she could do to show her appreciation for all the times her shadow came to her defense. The front door could only be opened by gripping a scanner bar built into the handle with her stamped hand. Once she entered the hallway, the stamp was visible. It looked like a stylized paw print with a circle for the pad, and 3 teardrop-shaped claw marks. The mark in the center had the number 15 inked halfway up and a scanner code in the bottom. The walls were painted in delicate patterns. Whatever story they had once told had faded over the years. There was no sign of her companions, but she had instructed them to go on without her. They had reserved a VIP room. How hard could it be to find them? The attendant at the weapon check counter stopped her as she passed. After convincing them her twin tails weren't whips or some other strange weapon, they allowed her to pass. Kayla could not only hear the music, but could feel the beat pulsating through the floor. As she passed out of the hallway into a large open room with semicircular stairwell descending from either side of another floor above her. A carpeted walkway passed through the archway which passed under the second floor, sloping downward to the dance and bar area below. Despite the inconvenience of being cut off from her knacks, Kayla was grateful for the suppression field. Despite all her training, it would be difficult to block out the thoughts of so many people. There was a background murmur which was experienced by people with a knack for psionics. The stronger the telepath, and larger the crowd, the louder the mental static would become. The difficulty of isolating individual thoughts also increased in proportion to the volume and proximity of people nearby. Busy starports had been nightmarish years ago, but they paled in comparison to a place like this. If it wasn't for the field which was suppressing her knack, the background noise in her head would have been deafening. The closest analogy would be that it was like tinnitus, it affected your ability to think instead of hear. Despite that, the silence within her mind was a bit unnerving. The structure was large enough to accommodate more people. The crowd became denser the closer you got to the perimeter of the dance floor. There was less traffic up on the overlook level. It looked like it would be easy enough to navigate through the area with only minor inconvenience. There was a strange quality to the music. Even after the song switched, there was an occasional beep that seemed out of place. Just to the side of each of the stairwells leading to the overlook there was a hallway with a sign over the entry doorway providing direction to the elevators to the balcony areas. The subtle curve of the hallway gave the impression it circled the main floor. Kayla blushed as she realized her hips were swaying and her feet kept moving. There was just something primal about the current musical selection that her body was responding to. She'd only realized it after intuitively avoiding a club-goer's attempt to grab her ass as they passed by. The heavy bass beat pulsed through her body. It felt damn pleasant passing through the cartilage in her black tail. She wondered how intense the feeling would be down on the dance floor. This certainly wasn't the way she envisioned being brought to climax, but if she was down there in the middle of the floor to this tune, she might. Although she suspected it would be a gradual build-up and lack in intensity. The sensation was reminiscent enough of cyanide fidgeting with the tail that it was making Kivaza's consciousness restless. She noticed the periodic beep was only in her right ear. Someone was trying to reach her on comms. Kayla stroked the top of her earpiece. There was no possible way she'd be able to hear over a voice connection. Luckily, they'd been sending her text-only messages. They had no actual content except for the repetition of the title, "Behind You." She'd been so focused on the movement and music, she hadn't even noticed the elevator recessed into the wall behind her, just a few feet to the left of the hallway to the club entrance. Kayla looked around for the cameras watching over the room, looked up at them, pointed to her ear and nodded, then held up a finger. The title of the next message received read, "Have fun." Kayla left the incoming message text visual overlay open. With her telepathy disabled by the suppression ring, she doubted the thought-to-text mode would work properly, but she enabled it for good measure. She didn't fully understand the technology, but everything seemed to be displaying properly. A confirmation message appeared in the image being projected into her mind, "Enable group chat." Kayla ran her finger along the metal feather pattern on the earpiece until she found the correct one, and accepted the invitation request. Messages came up on the mentally projected hologram screen as they all joined the chat room. Kayla attempted to transmit a greeting, but nothing happened. She tried again and again until the message went through. Thought-to-text did work, but only when she thought with a great deal of mental force. "This thing's great," Kayla transmitted. "I'll have to compliment her on her choice." They weren't using the same style of communicator. She wouldn't have any idea what was going on up there, or what was being said unless they typed in the message. As long as Kayla didn't think forcefully, they wouldn't get any messages from her either. She'd have to be careful about that. "The music is calling me, and my body needs to answer," Kayla transmitted as she rushed under the balcony area and started dancing her way through the crowd on her way toward the dance floor. There wasn't enough space to let her tails fly free. She was grateful Syntholo had tied them up. The interface was a little interesting. The messages were displayed with the senders. Name, followed by a colon, then the text being sent. Each sender's name was in a different color. When she sent a message, it just showed the sender's name in a faded gray color without the actual message text being displayed. Unfortunately, Cyan had initially set her name on the communicator to Striped Candy. Kayla wasn't sure if it was worth explaining, and was grateful nobody asked. "Nelfrey, we're having a bite to eat. Kiryu, watching now. Join you later." The further she made it down the carpeted walkway, the more intense the vibration through her body became. The lighting was dimmer in some areas and brighter in others. Shadows passed in front and behind her as she slipped through the vast assortment of club patrons. Roughly 2/3 were dressed for a night out on the town. Most of the others were wearing a variety of uniforms. Club 9th was apparently a hot spot for military personnel on shore leave. The smell of alcohol hung heavy in the air, intermingled with the natural species present. She knew her friends were keeping an eye on her, and she was garnering her fair share of looks from the people she passed, which should have made it easy to dismiss the feeling she was being watched. That was half the point. Kayla wanted to be seen, but this feeling was more than that. She felt like she was being followed, or more accurately stalked by some predatory beast. With her nacs disabled, her tails bound, her mobility limited, and the vibration through her tail driving her toward a gentle climax, she felt jittery, maybe even a little paranoid. Kayla stopped as she made it to the bottom of the sloped walkway, and looked around. It was hard to make out the people standing by the railings at the edge of the 4 balconies above the main floor. Higher up, beyond the balconies, she could see broad picture windows separated by gray pillars. Glowing numbers were set above each window numbered from 1 to 18. "Is that us?" Kayla transmitted as she pointed to number 15. A few seconds later, 2 figures moved to stand by the window and waved to her. Kayla smiled as she continued evaluating her surroundings. There were 4 curved bars encircling the dance floor, with small tables and chairs beyond them. There weren't any booths on this floor. Kiryu must have been on the balcony over watch when they been on that call earlier. There was a railing around the raised dance floor. There were a few stools positioned just on the outside of the railing on a wooden platform which was a half-dozen feet wide, and a single step higher than the floor. A ceiling-length red curtain hung at the very back of the room, ending at the top of the stage area which was an obvious remnant of the rich history of the architecture. VIP room number 9 was centered directly above the curtain. She could see the movements of a Terran-shaped figure on the other side of the glass pane of room 9. There was a round room, with a glass floor at its center 50 feet above the dance floor. Kayla double-checked the brochure. That was the watchtower. Despite being told the room had been reserved for the evening, there were no signs of movement and the lights were dim. Kayla forced her way through a group of people on her way to a stool next to the dance floor railing, while clenching and unclenching her fists as the beat of the music increased in speed and intensity. She could hear the muted sound of raised voices behind her. She grabbed onto the railing and held on as tight as she could as she climbed onto the stool. Her head rolled forward as she struggled to keep her hips from rolling, and the rhythmic shock waves of the heavy bass beat coursed through the cartilage in her tail. The sound of her soft moans was lost within the rapturous noise around her. The song was building to its climactic culmination as it drove her toward a different sort of finale. Something warm and soft brushed up against her right hip, as her identifier was listed in the group chat. Kayla had no idea what message had been sent. She felt fur against her left hip. A message sent indicator came up on the display. Her back arched, and her hips rolled forward, involuntarily, propelling her forward off of the stool. Her pelvis struck the railing, and her head collided with something solid behind her, and a shuddering gasp escaped her lips just as the song ended. She looked up at the ceiling, panting softly as she realized she was surrounded by large wolves. They weren't Lupians. They were larger and were walking like quadrupeds, but they were wearing shorts and had badges hanging on chains around their necks. She had no idea how many people had heard her poorly timed gasp during the silence between songs, but from vocalizations and laughter, a few certainly had. The individual her head had struck as she fell looked down at her face from above her. Its jaws were massive. She was momentarily panicked as it opened its mouth and confused when it said, "Follow." What in the? Kayla transmitted Kiryu, club security guards. Nelfree, Maiko, I think. The guards that had been flanking her stood up, bipedal, while holding her arms and pulled her to her feet. Kayla was glad the song that was on now lacked the severe bass beat of the prior one. It had no effect on the nerves in her tail at all. The guards on either side of her resumed their quadrupedal posture once she was standing. Kayla followed the guard that had spoken to her. Their backs were as high as her hips, their dense fur was long and brown and their claws were long, curved, and sharp. They led her into a security room positioned underneath the balcony, facing toward the center of the main room. The lead canine stood and opened the door for her, as the others flanked her until she'd entered. The other two guards resumed their duties once Kayla and the lead guard entered the room, closing the door behind them. Structurally, he was similar to a Lupian, but far closer to their wolf-like origins in overall look, despite their long, bent hind legs. It was clear from the way it moved that this caninoid species spent the majority of their lives walking on all fours, but were able to walk on two legs and had a fairly long arm reach. Their arms were well adapted for use in either bipedal or quadrupedal movement. Kayla estimated their height at roughly 8.5 feet, slightly taller than Yari and Ziku, but nowhere near their width or overall body mass. If she wasn't used to dealing with her adopted sons, the being would undoubtedly seem far more impressive. The room she'd been brought to was mostly soundproofed. There was a large desk by the far wall, a door to the left, a large pillow on the right, and a stool in front of the desk. The guard motioned to the stool with its broad snout, "Sit." Kayla did as she was instructed, although she wasn't entirely sure what she'd done wrong. The guard sat down, wolf-like on the pillow, and watched her patiently. It was clearly sentient and capable of speech, although it had only spoken to her using individual words so far. She could sense Kivaza's psyche nearing the surface of her mind, readying to merge into her own consciousness, but for now her sister's soul seemed content to observe things as they played out to see how Kayla would handle the situation without her. Although it hadn't been a mild orgasm, the endorphin release by the side of the dance floor had calmed her nerves both literally and figuratively. "Why am I here?" Kayla asked in a measured tone, while trying desperately not to fidget under the canonoid's intense gaze. From this vantage point, its shorts were unable to disguise the fact it was quite definitively male. Kayla smiled weakly, hoping the guard hadn't noticed her looking. She considered asking their name, but with how surreal the situation already seemed, she was terrified asking such a benign question would trigger the opening scene of some cheesy porno she wanted nothing to do with. Kayla sighed with relief as the door opened and a sub-Terran woman in a blue security outfit walked in. A Cayman, an A-room, and a Terran disguised as a Vulpine walk into a bar, the dark-haired woman said as she walked behind the desk and pulled out the chair. "If there is a punchline, I'd like to hear it. If not, I'm holding you here until you tell me who you came here to kill. We have strict rules against committing violent acts on the premises." "That's not why I'm here," Callie insisted. "You come in disguised as another species," the woman said. "You wait until your companions get settled in a VIP room so they can observe your progress. You make your way through the club using tight fluid motion, like they do in the dance-based martial arts, while clenching and unclenching your fists. Then you barrel through a crowd of people to rush the stage, ignoring my guards. I'm assuming the target made it out of reach, just in the nick of time. This being your first time here isn't in your favor either. I checked your payment information. Your chip claims you're a woman almost everyone has heard of, but nobody knows who they really are or what they look like. All of these factors point to a singular conclusion. Tell me, is there a punchline?" "This is just a big misunderstanding," Kayla said frantically. "When you say it all like that, I can see how it could seem suspicious. I could explain everything, but it's a bit personal, and really embarrassing." "How so?" "Please don't make me explain how my clit works," Kayla whined. A message line bearing her transmitter ID displayed on her communication interface saying, "Transmission failed. Error. Unable to locate access point. Error re-establishing connection." The woman sat down. "I'm not sure if that was meant to be a joke, but I'm not laughing yet. Let's take this from the top. Who are you?" "I am Lady Darkseid," Kayla said irritably. "You can confirm my identity through Port Liberty, or Gao Rune over at Gistasio's. Or the proprietress of Alliance Arms." "So," the woman snickered with a crooked smile, "I can verify your identity by contacting an arms dealer, someone that works with spies and assassins, or starport security personnel who are underpaid and easily bribed? Sounds great." Kayla sat there, dumbfounded. She considered pleading with Kivaza to take over, and wished she'd brought Shinji, just so the matter could be cleared up more easily. Granted, she didn't really want him anywhere near her, other than for her own convenience. Then again, that seemed to be the crux of her relationship to him. She'd spent too much time relying on others. She could handle this. "Why are you here?" the woman sighed. "Can I just explain myself without the Q&A?" "You can try," the woman smirked. "You may want to start with why you're wearing a mask. There's no way you bought that on a whim, it fits too well for that." "My friend, Kiryu, bought it for me," Kayla said while trying to hide her annoyance. She thought it would be fun to turn this into a bitch's night out. "She works at Alliance Arms and has access to my measurements. That, and I kind of told her and never mind that. Listen, I'm shipping out in a few hours. I just wanted to have a little fun before I go." The woman jotted down notes in a scratch pad as she listened silently. "This isn't just my first time here. It's the first time I've ever been to a dance club, and after this it may be my last. We get plenty of business, the woman said calmly. Whether or not you come back here is no real concern. I didn't mean here. I meant any club, Kayla snarled. I'm starting to think I should just avoid places with music entirely. At least I don't have to worry about my knack going out of control this time. Impulse control issues, the woman said quietly as she wrote something down. What? No, Why did you charge the dance area? I didn't. I was just. You're good at starting to answer, the guard mocked. You may want to start finishing. Oh, and for the record, I think I know how a clit works. That was your initial statement, if I recall correctly. You've been hostile and evasive since I walked in that door. You're welcome to leave anytime. Your tab reserve will not be refunded, and you'll be life banned from returning. Just say the word and I'll instruct Fatal to remove you from the premises. The canine guard's ear twitched. It looked to the woman as she said Fatal. That was apparently his name. This really isn't fair, Kayla complained as she raised her mask onto the top of her head. I don't want to leave. I came here to relax, have some fun, and maybe. I just want to. The woman leaned back and crossed her arms. It must be hard for you to make friends, considering your inability to finish a sentence. It's just embarrassing, Kayla said as she carefully pulled the end of her black tail from under her sarong. The woman opened a desk drawer and rested her hand inside. It's okay, Kayla insisted. It's not a weapon. This is my clitoris. Can I explain myself now? Looks like a tail augment to me, the woman said as she removed her hand from the drawer and prepared to write on her notepad. If what you're saying is true, at least I'll have an interesting story for later. Kayla stared at the floor, blushing brightly as she struggled to answer. It's not a gene augment. I used a mutation core, and some things got shifted around. It's in my tail, and that song, the beat, was making it vibrate. It felt well. I wanted to know how it would feel between all the speakers, but when I got there, it was just way too intense, so I ran to a chair so I could sit down before damn it. Nelfrey's seen the scans, but that doesn't help. She wouldn't know what she was looking at. If Cyan was here she could verify what I'm saying, but I haven't even been able to talk to her since she was called away by Aisha. The woman held up a hand to silence her and stopped writing. Fatal, what happened when she reached the railing? The wolf-like guard paused between each word, grab, sit, fall, sigh. Wait here, I'll be back, the woman sighed as she put away the notepad. Fatal, make sure she doesn't go anywhere. The canine either bared its teeth or smiled. It was difficult to tell which. Kayla sat uncomfortably for some time after being left alone in the room with the large wolf, which had laid down on its stomach after his supervisor left the room. She was somewhat grateful the awkward bulge was no longer visible. Are you allowed to talk to me? Kayla asked nervously as she tucked the tip of her tail back under the fabric around her waist. Yes, a friend called you a myco, is that your species? Yes. You don't talk much, do you? No, the word rumbled out of his mouth. I hope I'm not irritating you, Kayla said apologetically. It's just taking her a long time. It's just really quiet in here. I'm used to at least having telepathic background noise. She shifted her feet back and forth and fidgeted with her skirt as they sat in silence for a while. Why is this taking so long? Kayla grumbled. If Shinji wasn't so inept, none of this would have happened. My other self can get off with her partner, why can't I? I don't think I'm Dodgemare, and I'm attracted to guys. Well, girls too, but mostly males. Fatal was disinterested, ignoring her, or simply had no comment. Maybe this was a bad idea, Kayla said as she lowered her mask back into position. Well, not the mask. That wasn't exactly my idea. I was just thinking, if the cute Terran guy isn't doing it for me, maybe I can find someone that can. Kayla stared at her feet silently until she was confident Fatal wasn't going to respond. They didn't seem to be paying any attention, which was fine with her. There was something therapeutic about merely pretending he was listening. I'm pretty much my own species, not really subterran, so anyone I'm with is technically interspecies. It's all a matter of how far I'm willing to color outside the lines, if you know what I mean. When I called my friends earlier, I sort of made a comment about that. You know, trying to find out where my comfort zone ends. I've only been attracted to one guy that's, well, fuzzy, and I don't even understand why. I'm probably just barking up the wrong tree. No offense meant. Fat startled her as he inhaled and let out a rumbling growl. He said something. It was either no talking or none taken. It didn't quite sound like either. His ability to speak non-bestial dialogues, although he seemed to understand more than he was letting on. For all she knew, he could be quite chatty when speaking a shared language. I didn't think you were really listening, Kayla blushed. I just couldn't tell her why I came here. You don't say much, so I guess I'm not worried about you telling anyone. His ears turned forward. Kayla smiled nervously. I mean, what would I even say? My helmsman thinks I need to get fucked and hopes it'll calm me down. Hi, the cute Shamfarian guy I'm with can't get me off, so I'm here to find a cock that'll do the trick. That sounds even worse when I say it aloud. What if it's not just him, maybe it's subterrans in general? I'm not at all attracted to Udbar guys. Dareth are a matriarchal society and keep the best males in their region of space. Any out this far are bound to have something really wrong with them. Maybe I'd consider a Darien, but I'm far more attracted to their women over the men. I don't mind the blue skin, it's just the women have soft features. My mother was Lampharian, so that's a hard no. I'm babbling, aren't I? Kayla scolded herself without actually stopping. There's just so much I don't know. What species am I attracted to, and which are viable options? I mean, as long as everything fits together and everyone is willing, it's all right, isn't it? Fatal sat up, watching her intently. His head was at eye level with her while she was sitting on the stool. Kayla struggled to keep her eyes straight forward as she looked toward him. Being somewhat unfamiliar with his species, she was a little curious about how the limbs of the semi-quadrupedal species were attached to its body, but a close examination would end up with her looking. There. What am I saying? Kayla scolded herself. I must sound terrible, going on and on about what I'd consider sleeping with, not even taking the time to wonder who might be attracted to me. Just because I'd be willing, doesn't mean they'd consider fucking me. What do you think? He tilted his broad head to the side and blinked twice. That came out wrong. I wasn't asking if you would consider. Kayla caught herself looking down at his girdle and quickly looked away. As long as everyone is up for it, is it okay if I mess around with people that don't look like me? His left ear turned toward the exit and his right turned horizontal to the side. I'm sorry that took so long, the woman said as she returned to the room, closing the door behind herself. She walked between Kayla and Fatal on her way behind the desk. I really should introduce myself, the dark-haired woman said as she sat. My name is Leshar Delpani. I'm the second shift floor manager here at Club 9th. I do apologize for any inconvenience this has caused you, Lady Darkseid. I don't know why that one song. Kayla said softly. What song was playing at the time? The woman inquired while looking over at Fatal. The wolf let out a warbling growl. Is that a track by Estakril? The woman asked. Fatal nodded. That explains it. You see, the band Estakril was started by a team of firefighters. They utilized the same infrasonic technology used to put out fires as a backtrack when recording their music. I'd advise you to keep off the floor when we're playing their songs. The DJ is supposed to announce the next selection, but they don't always. I could task a guard with keeping an eye out and escorting you away from the main floor to prevent further issues. Leshar said in a professional tone. Fadl made a rumbling noise deep in his throat. It's all settled then, Leshar smiled as she tore off the top page in her notebook, crumpled it up, and dropped it in the trash. Lady Darkseid, I've been instructed to ask you to refrain from approaching VIP suite number 9 or the curtain on the main stage at this time. That being said, on behalf of House Delpani, I would like to formally welcome you to Club A9th. Please have a wonderful evening. Fadl opened the door for her, please. He walked to the door, stood up as straight as he could and held the door open until Kayla passed. He returned to all fours and vanished into the crowd moments later. It wasn't too surprising a club as old as this one would be owned by a Lamentic family. Kayla didn't know if Leshar was a Shamfarian defender or a Lamfarian half-breed, but either way she was just glad to be out of the security office, and even more grateful to see the message, "Connection re-established," come up on her communicator display. Syntholo, everything okay? I'm heading up there soon, Kayla transmitted. Nelfree, Kiryu's down dancing. You should join her. Kayla debated which way to go. She did want to dance and the current song was safe. Kiryu, haven't you two had enough alone time? Kayla headed directly to the elevators to the VIP rooms. Kiryu, you joining me? I'm going to take a look at the room and eat first, Kayla transmitted. She was so determined to try something new and different when she decided to come here but was having second thoughts. Babbling at Fadl had helped her clear her head a little. She'd at least managed to answer one of her own questions. Even if it was just to sate her own needs, everything fitting wasn't enough. She kept being distracted by the monstrosity between the canine's legs. It was hard to not see it. Even if it could fit, just know. There were enough subterrans at the club that finding someone willing shouldn't be too hard. There were a lot more counter-hominids. Even if she was attracted to any of them, like she was to Syntholo's bestial form, would she be able to follow through? Kayla took a moment's pause as she reached the door to the VIP room. Was she going to interrupt Syntholo and Nelfree in the throes of passion, and what would that even look like? She shook it off and knocked on the door before entering.